Hello and welcome to the podcast. You're listening to Be Uncluttered. I'm Rebecca Mazzino and with me is Tara Tuttle, and together we are going to help you on your journey to a life free of clutter.
Hi and welcome to the show. This week I am having a chat to Rachelle Glendon. Rachelle is a wife and mother from Brisbane who understands what makes a busy life but prefers to live hers slowly. She is the host of the How to Live Slow podcast and coordinator of the How to Live Slow Facebook community. Today I have Rachelle here with me to discuss the difference between self-care and self-soothing. Welcome to the show, Rachelle.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to chat.
Let's talk about self-care. This idea of the entire self-care movement has exploded in recent times. It's this broad brush, all-encompassing term that we seem to throw around, and it includes any and all activities that nurture us or tend to our needs. We hear repeatedly that self-care is essential for a complete or happy or fulfilling life, and get told that it's something we should be doing more of and making regular time for. But commonly, when people refer to self-care activities, the self-care things they're partaking in, they're often talking about what is really defined as self-soothing. So I want you to enlighten us and explain to us the difference between those two terms. What is self-care and what is self-soothing?
Yeah, so self care to my mind is all those things that we do with a long term approach to our well being. And sometimes they're not always the most comfortable things to be doing. And we'll go into exactly what those things might be in a minute. But yeah, self soothing, on the other hand, is kind of like what I might also refer to as consumer self care. Which is like, we spend money on certain things, or we might do things, like massages and bubble baths and all of that stuff to, make ourselves feel better in the moment, but which may actually be a form of procrastination sometimes. So that's.
Yeah, right. So you mentioned having a massage. What are some other examples of these self-soothing activities that we commonly refer to as self-care? Because I can think of a few that I've coined myself, taken a photo of getting a pedicure and hashtag self-care. So if other people out there are relating to this, they're not alone. I've done it as well. So what are some of the other things we commonly think of as self-care, but that are actually self-soothing?
Yeah, like you said, like it's getting a pedicure or a massage or having a bubble bath or, a chocolate bar or something like that. Anything where you sort of say, oh, I've had a stressful day, so I totally deserve this.
Mm-hmm.
At retail therapy, buying a new dress or something like that. Those are all sort of like what I think, like I said, consumer self care that we sort of see on Instagram.
Yep. But all those things sound really lovely and do make you feel good in the moment. So why don't they fit then under the umbrella of genuine self-care? Is it because the benefit is short-lived?
So, I mean, they are important parts of our self-care toolkit. Like it is important. Like, sometimes you do need to have a bubble bath or get a massage. But I feel like when you only focus on those things, that's where it can get to be, maybe a problem where underneath that, like asking yourself, like, why do I need a massage? Why do I feel so stressed out? And looking at those things, that's where the real self care kind of comes into play. And asking yourself the hard question of, am I getting this thing or doing this thing or overcommitting my budget to buy myself this fancy, bag or whatever, to procrastinate or to self soothe because I'm not dealing with whatever it is that's making me stressed or overwhelmed or, not having the hard conversations that I need to be having and that sort of thing.
Okay, so why do you think it's important to know the difference between the two terms and what they do and don't constitute? What's the benefit of understanding the difference between proper, genuine self-care and self-soothing?
I think it's important to know the difference because, well, it's important to understand why you're doing a particular thing. So if you're self-soothing because you're procrastinating or avoiding, you might be, procrastination is a form of stress relief. So when we have a lot of overwhelming tasks ahead of us at work, or we need to have a conversation with someone that we don't want to have, we can procrastinate on it. And then that's when we engage in those self-soothing activities like procrastinating or watching TV or cleaning the house when we should be doing work or something like that. So that's like when you understand the difference between, asking yourself, well, why am I doing this? Then you know whether it's the right choice to be doing the self-soothing activities or whether you actually just need to pick up the phone and make the phone call or, or maybe it's, if you're not feeling good about, mental health wise, maybe it's booking in to see somebody or asking for help, or maybe it's actually going to bed early enough to get up and do the exercise that you've been promising yourself to do. So it's just understanding the difference of where you're coming from and why you're doing a certain activity. And then you can kind of figure out whether or not maybe the self-soothing activity is actually making the problem worse, because you're not actually living up to your best self.
Yeah, I can see how self-soothing and doing those kind of activities can almost mask what the real problem is, because if you've got a really like a chronically stressful job and you think, okay, well, my days are full, my mind is full, I'm not sleeping well because I'm thinking about my day tomorrow and whatever, but I'm going to get home from work and have a bubble bath and get myself a glass of wine and read a book for 20 minutes in the bath because that's self-care. And that does make you feel good in the moment. And then you are able to get up tomorrow and do it again. But if you do that over and over and keep kind of placating yourself with these tiny little rewards or self-soothing moments, you never get to the crux of the problem, which is I have a chronically stressful job and it's impacting my ability to sleep. It's impacting the free time I have. It's, maybe it's causing me other stress related health issues or whatever. So I can see how this self-soothing is really lovely, but it can kind of lead you down a different path where you don't recognize and don't remedy the bigger problem, which is, you kind of need to step back to look at rather than just pushing it down by looking after yourself only in the moment.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where like slow living and what I talk about really comes into its own, because you learn to respect your own time and to take action towards the things that are your priorities. You get to know what your priorities are and you make space for them. Talking about particularly like work, and if you've got a really stressful job, or maybe you want to change careers, but you've worked in the current career that you've got for so long that you're paid so much money that the other career option that you really want to go down, maybe you want to change from being in corporate to starting your own business, it's going to be a massive pay cut, at least in the short term. So you procrastinate on actually doing the things that will get you towards that, because you can't conceive how you would ever live on that lower level of income. But procrastinating, or like self-soothing, which is consumer self-care, would be keeping you stuck in that job because you're spending the money on the things that make you feel good about the where you're at, or
Mm,
you see what I'm saying? So
yeah.
when you go, okay, well, I really want to change my job, I've got a new direction I want to head into, how can I get control of my finances, take a rein on, like maybe I don't need those things, maybe I can just cut back the budget to the point where I can save some money so that I can make the leap. And to me, that's the long-term view of actually looking after your well-being, which is the ultimate self-care.
Yeah, so this term that you've used, consumer self-care, which really is self-soothing,
Yeah.
do you feel then we are falsely sold to by the consumerist market? Because ads and influencers on social media, they all tell us that we should get a facial and we should eat that bar of chocolate or we should have a pedicure because it's self-care and because we deserve it, because we have a hard life. Are they just leading us down the wrong path? Are they trying to sell us comfort in the moment when what we really need is healing, like longer term, deeper healing?
I think absolutely. Yeah, I think they're selling us their products, but calling it comfort,
Mm.
essentially. Like, you know, we we don't buy a product based on its list of features. We buy it on the emotion and they know that, like, we all know that that's how marketing works, right? So
Mhm.
when they give you that, okay, say it's the chocolate bar and it's that can of Coke or fizzy drink or whatever, and you see that lifestyle that they're portraying, like, if you have this product, that means you respect yourself or whatever. Of course, that's going to sell more chocolate bars than just saying this is chocolate.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I
And
think
it has this
absolutely.
many calories and it tastes good. Yeah, when
Yeah.
when they sell it as in you've had a tough day and the kids have been nagging at you and you're exhausted and you're stressed, sit down on the couch and relax and, have this bar of chocolate because you've earned it. You deserve this, girlfriend. Like I buy into that. I go, yes, I do deserve it. Yes, I do need that. Um it annoys me that even though I know that stuff, it still works.
I
It
know.
still works.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and that's why it works, is because they do reach into that subconscious, emotional heartstrings. Like, we don't want our
Mm,
lives to be this stressful. We don't want to feel like our kids are nagging us. Unfortunately, a chocolate bar or a bubble bath doesn't change that.
no, and that's exactly the point, isn't it?
Yeah.
We kind of placate ourselves with all these really short term feel good moments or pleasures or whatever it is to get us through, when what we really need to be looking at is, why do we need to get through? Why can't we enjoy? So maybe stop placating yourself, look at the real deeper issue. Why do you feel like you need assistance to get through the day? Or why do you feel like you need a reward? At the end of the day, obviously, you haven't set your life up, or you're not in a position where you're genuinely happy or fulfilled or content with your existence. So why not work on that deeper, harder stuff rather than just giving yourself tiny little rewards for surviving?
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I said at the very start, is that it's a long-term kind of well-being practice, and it also isn't always easy or comfortable, and sometimes it can be really painful and difficult to do these real self-care things in the short term. But over the long term, you'll look back and realize that if you've taken action towards the things like getting on top of your budget, understanding your values, taking the time to do the things that are important to you, dealing with your mental health, your physical health, and all of those things, they take discipline and work. But um, it's all about regret-free living, right?
Yeah, so you mentioned a bunch of stuff there that real self-care is. So there, I'm guessing they're all the kinds of things that actually do constitute self-care. So not these immediate gratification, placating small wins or small soothing moments. It's the deeper stuff.
Yep.
So I was going to say, why should we be spending time doing them? I guess it's kind of evident, but can you run through that list again, or a few of those things that you mentioned, the real self-care activities?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, for me, real self care is all about understanding what your boundaries are, what your capacity and energy for each day is. And for women, this is also understanding your cycles and your energy flows throughout the month, because that definitely changes. So that's an important thing to know. But yeah, understanding that you've only got a certain amount of energy and capacity for people and things. You've only got a certain amount of time in the day. So knowing that and honoring that, respecting your own time, respecting others' by holding your own boundaries and learning how to say no to things that might actually just be people pleasing. To then, go inward and say, well, what are my values? So, understanding what your values are and looking at, are you spending your time in a way that honors those and is in alignment with those values? So if you say that your family is the number one thing in your life, but you spend all of your time working and you haven't had any quality time with any of your family members in weeks, then that may be something that you want to bring back into alignment.
Mm.
Equally, if you say your friends are the most important thing to you, but you never seem to find time to give them a call, that might be something else that you might want to do. Another thing is then to also look at your finances. So if you find
Ugh. Yeah,
yourself
see,
in,
that's why
yeah,
that's why people have a bubble bath, because looking at your finances, who wants to do that? But it's true, isn't it? Like, that is
yeah,
ultimate self-care, getting yourself in a financially stable position. But because it seems hard and uncomfortable, we go,
Yeah.
oh, I'll get a pedicure instead.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, so getting your finances sorted, like even things like making sure you've got the right insurances and making sure you've got a will in place if you've especially if you've got kids, and making sure that, maybe you need to downsize and think about getting a smaller mortgage or a smaller home, or um, it doesn't have to be that. Maybe it's just about paying off your credit cards and any like, you know, small loans that you've got, things like that. Just getting it all, in alignment so that you can. We all want a soft place to land, and financial security is one of the elements of a soft place to land. So making sure
Mm.
you've got, what making the most of your finances in the best way that you can with whatever resources you have available. And then also looking at your health and well-being from a holistic point of view. Like we all kind of think that well-being is, eating salad and going to the gym, and we have this expectation of what a healthy person is. But sometimes going to the gym, like, and thrashing your body is actually depleting it. When you're really stressed, going for a long run or going to the gym and doing heaps of weights actually can be the worst thing for your body. If you're really stressed and you just need rest, maybe some yin yoga or something like that is actually much better for you. So actually acknowledging or understanding what your body needs and nourishing your body, and not punishing it for not looking the way that you want it or not working in the way that you want it to work. So that's also got to do with like self-acceptance and self-care, because you care enough about your body that you love it regardless of how it looks or how it works.
Yes, that definitely makes sense. So, one thing that I've heard you say, you've mentioned through our chat, is the idea relating to self-care of honoring our time, that's a self-care activity. And that's something I hadn't really considered personally as self-care. And you talk about keeping promises to yourself, saying no to things that are just people pleasing. So, can you talk a little bit around that and about how honoring our own time fits into this notion of self care?
Yeah, sure. Yes. So I feel that, yeah, people pleasing is something that we all kind of do. We say yes to things that we don't really want to do. And we do it so much that often we're not even really aware that that's what we're doing. We just feel this deep sense of like, I never get time for myself, or I never do the things that I want to do because I'm always busy, always doing things for other people. And you might even feel a sort of niggling sense of resentment, but you're not even really sure. And that's because I feel that by being a people pleaser, we're not really honoring what we really want. And we've talked a little bit about money, and money is one of our resources, and our energy is another one of our resources. But both of those things we can get more of. We can never really get more of our time. Once
Hmm.
it's used, it's used. So time, in that sense, for me, is the most precious resource that we have. So we don't really want to get to the end of our life and think that we didn't really live up to our own expectations of the kind of person that we want to be. So honoring your own time really is probably the most important part of real self-care in my mind.
So, can you think of ways that we can, like practical ways to do this more? I know I quite often will talk to people about having a moment of pause when people ask you to do anything, even if it's something lovely like come over for dinner, or it can be um, uh, we need someone to be vice president of the whatever, the soccer club. Whenever anyone asks something of you, before you have that instinctive reply, because we all like to say yes and keep everyone happy, is to have a moment of pause. And if you can't say no at the time, but you feel like you want to say no, come up with I need to go home and check my diary, and I'd love to help, but if it's not suitable, then I'll definitely let you know in the next hour or the next week or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So, other than having that moment of pause, can you think of other ways that we might try and honor our time?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing to know is that if you feel like it's hard to say no to other people's request on your time, it's probably because you feel really guilty that you don't have a good reason. And meaning that we think of ourselves as having to have something else on as the reason why we can't do the thing that they're asking. But sometimes not having anything on in the diary, like, you need to be at home sometimes to meal prep if you want to have some healthy meals for lunch for the week at work. And we don't think of that as being valuable time, or at least not in the normal sense. But when you start to think of that as being a valuable way to spend your time, and you start to think of the things that would be constituting real self-care, like, okay, well, I know I need to get on top of my will, but you actually haven't ever scheduled any time in for that. Then when you start to schedule in those things, then you have, I guess, in your mind, a reason to say no, even if you don't have to say, oh, sorry, I can't do that because I've got to do my will. Like, you don't want to say that. But in your mind, you have got that sense of, I need to say no to this because I have actually got other things to do. So I think, yeah, remembering that you don't have to have another commitment that would be reasonable for someone
Yeah.
else for you to then say no to them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And because that's the thing, and even because it almost feels like if you don't have a commitment, you are free. But that's so not the case, because sometimes it is nice to just be home with no commitments so you can get bored. Not that anyone knows how to get bored these days, but that's a
Exactly.
whole nother podcast.
Yeah.
Um, but like to have a Saturday afternoon where you have no commitments and you can either hang out with your children, or you can read a book, or you can go for a walk, or you can do whatever your heart desires at that time based on your feelings, rather than having to weigh up commitments. Like, yeah, someone asks you, can you be here at this time? No, I don't have anything on. But giving yourself permission to say, no, look, that space is valuable in my week, or that's my downtime, and so I'm not prepared to book it out. I think we have to get better at saying that, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. They say spontaneity is the spice of life, but if you have absolutely crammed your diary full of commitments, then there's no room for that. And like you said, being bored or just having space available to say yes to things in the moment,
Mm.
rather than, having yourself scheduled for a month in advance and someone says you want to catch up for coffee and you're like, yeah, I'm available for 20 minutes on Tuesday next month.
Yeah. Well, I had a moment of doing this recently where someone asked me to be secretary of something or other, and I was like, okay, I'm going to be really honest, and I said, look, I'm going to say no. And it's not because I have a great reason.
Yeah,
Like, I'm not saying no because I've got a conflict of interest, or no because I have something else on that night when you meet. I'm saying no because I want to keep the space to say yes to something that I'm really interested in or really committed to. Like,
yeah,
I'd love to join a book club, or as it turned out, I've started playing netball again. But it was like, um, I don't want to fill my time with something I feel really meh about, because my time is precious and I want to have that time available so that if something comes up, and as it turned out, netball, like it's hilarious. It's a mum's netball team. Most I haven't played for 20 years. Some of the mums have never played ever, but we do it on a Monday night after our kids play netball, and it is hilarious and we're having such a ball. But when this came up, I was like, hell yes, this is what I want to do. And I'm like, I'm so glad I said no to being a secretary of this blah blah committee, which felt like only obligation. There was no joy in that at all. And I know someone has to take that job, but I was like, if I have a free night during the week, I want to do it with something that fills me up, not something that drains me. So I think being able to say to people as well, I'm saying no to that because the space in my life is valuable, or I want to keep the space free for something that really lights me up, and this is not it. I think that's okay
yeah.
too.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right. And if you had have said yes, like you said, you wouldn't have had the opportunity to do netball, which sounds amazing, by the way. But also, you take that opportunity away from someone who does want to do that, who would be lit up by doing that secretary job.
Hmm.
There are people who do enjoy that sort of thing. And yeah, leaving it open for someone to say yes to is also important. Um, but I remember there's a book called Drop the Ball by Tiffany Dufu, and she talks about this specifically. And this is why I think understanding your values is so important, because she said, like, one of my values as a working mum is to make sure that I have at least 20 minutes of quality time with my kids every day. Um, So when I was asked to be on the PNC, I knew it was an immediate no, because that just because, like, being a good engaged mum doesn't involve necessarily being on the PNC. That actually takes time away from my kids.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was a really great way, and that's what I immediately thought of when you said secretary.
Yeah, and look,
um,
how would you suggest then? Because it's one thing to say, figure out your values or, get in touch with them, but that requires some level of perspective. And quite often we have to step back a little bit in order to focus on what is important, because trying to cram, between 4:35 and 4:45 on a Tuesday afternoon, trying to go schedule, I've got 10 minutes there, I need to sit down and figure out my values, quite often doesn't happen. We need to either be away or be removed from the immediate,
yeah.
chaos of our lives to assess that. Do you have any strategies? Like, would you journal about it, or would you, if you have a significant other in your life, would you, maybe have a date night or go for a walk and discuss it? How do you figure that out? How do you practice the self care of understanding what your values are?
Well, again, I think it comes back to slow living. So prioritizing that downtime and that rest and that space, for those things to just naturally kind of come up.
Hmm.
So um, it's interesting because I do actually have a program called The Slow Life, and in that we do some values training. And um, one of my clients said, you got to think about priorities, right? As being, if everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority.
Hmm.
So it's different than having, well, I say values, but I mean priorities, because you can say that you value friends, family, travel, this, that, the other. But actually, what are your priorities at the moment? They don't have to be fixed, and they can change. So maybe at the moment you've got, kids at school, and that your priority is your little family bubble. And the other priority might be personal growth. So um, figuring that out, it does take time, but also it requires you to be okay with letting go of some other things.
Hmm.
Um, so I don't think there's one direct process to figure out exactly what your values are or what your priorities are. And they don't have to stay. You don't have to commit to them forever. But say, like, I have one friend who, she's got 4 kids, and she and her husband have a business, but then she's got a mum who has, and a grandma who's sick, and her mum's looking after her grandma. And she said, I really want to prioritize my family, but my mum's always asking me to help with my grandma, and I feel really guilty about not making that a priority. So I think, like, understanding that it's actually okay to say no to some things, and some things will be really hard
Hmm.
to sort of let go, but doesn't mean that you can't make them a priority again later.
Yeah, and
Yeah, so I don't know if that really answers
yeah, I
in the kind of way you wanted.
no, that it definitely gives us a bit of insight. And I think people have to find out what works for them. I mean, some people it might
Yeah,
be very instinctual and they might be able to figure out almost instantly what their priorities are. But I think it's also that understanding that prior means first, and there can really only be one first thing. So if you have to list what is important to you in order, you can't put 10 things at number one.
yeah,
Those
yeah,
things are 1
exactly.
to 10. And so
Yeah,
maybe the family bubble is 1 and looking after grandma is 2. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that grandma is insignificant. It just means that if it comes to a choice between those two things, you know which one will win out. And maybe not every time, but more times than not. And so I think
yeah,
sometimes having that clarity helps you make those decisions, because in the moment when things are getting thrown at you, and competing for your time, competing for your energy and attention, you answer thinking, well, it's in my top 10. I have to say yes. But it's like, okay, well, hang on, where does this rate? It's number 5, and I'm giving up something that's number 2 to spend time doing something that's number 5. Okay, then that doesn't
yeah.
equate. I need to reassess. Um,
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And I really like the analogy of when you're saying, like, throwing things at you. If you think of those things that are coming at you as being
mhm.
balls, which one's a glass that you have to catch and which ones would just bounce. Like
Ooh,
if
I
you dropped a
love
glass ball,
that.
it would break.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, that's really good. I think that's a really powerful image. So, is there any overlap? Getting back to the whole idea of self care and self soothing
Mhm.
being kind of these two areas of our lives, one being more long term focused, deeper healing, and one being like immediate short term gratification. Is there any overlap? Can self soothing for one person be self care for another, or are they kind of mutually exclusive?
I think that they are probably more so, it depends on not the person, but the scenario.
Yep.
So sometimes what you need is self soothing, sometimes what you need is self care. So I think about, like, say, if you're going to start seeing a psychologist because you've got some, childhood trauma to deal with, that is going to be a lot of emotional heavy lifting, more than likely. So, upping the self soothing stuff like the bubble baths and all of that is probably, going to bed and getting lots of rest and all of those. That's actually going to support you in that longer term self care of dealing with the trauma so that you can move forward. So, it depends on, again, the reason why. So, if you are having a bubble bath to avoid going to the psychologist, then that would be a different you know,
Hmm.
reason. So I think there's overlap, but I think they're also both part tools in a toolkit as well.
Yeah. And I think even just having, for people listening to this podcast, and I know certainly I've had a few light bulb moments just talking to you, just having the understanding of the two and the difference between the two, you can take the moment to question yourself about whether this self soothing activity, which is really lovely, and it's
Yeah.
like you said, we're not self soothing rebels that we, suggesting that you don't do it. Um, but if you check in with yourself and go, right, is this self soothing just because I want to do something nice for me? Or is it masking a deeper problem that I am trying to avoid dealing with? And having the appreciation that those two things might be getting in the way of each other, um, and asking yourself the question, checking in with yourself, it might just lead you to the right answer.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And asking yourself, like, what's going to feel better in the long run?
Mm,
Like, is it going to be self-soothing in the moment, or is it being the kind of person that does the hard things that makes the difference?
absolutely. Okay. Oh, this has been a really wonderful discussion. Thank you so much for your insight. It's been really valuable. So, I will make sure that we share all the links to your resources in our show notes. But if listeners want to get more of you right now, where can they find you? Where do you hang out?
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for inviting me on the show. It's been an amazing chat. I've really enjoyed today. And if you want to find me online, it's my website. I'm on Pinterest, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and also my podcast. They're all just How to Live Slow. So the website's howtoliveslow.com, and you just search that in any. I'm pretty much everywhere.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Rachelle. And if you have got some comments or some tips or some questions in relation to living slow or the difference between self care and self soothing, please come and join us in our Facebook community and have a chat there. That's where all the good discussions happen. And we will be back with you again next week.
Thanks for joining us. We'd love it if you'd leave a review or tell all your friends about us so that they too can be uncluttered. If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us at beuncluttered.com.au or on social media or on our own websites at clearspace.net.au and basklifecoaching.com.